Morning, everybody. Morning. You should have got here early, I'm sorry. There's a couple of seats here. Thank you for the introduction and thank you for having me. It's really good that you have this, given that talent is the only asset that you have in your industry, in our industry. My stated intent, by the way, is to get your best people to work on my brands and to do what it takes for that to happen. Because talent is what we've got. We have some lovely brands, but they're only lovely because great people did great things on them. And hopefully you know our brands, Guinness and Smirnoff and Johnny Walker and Tanqueray and Pimm's and Lagavulin and Talisker. They're sold in 200 countries around the world. That means that our consumers reflect every sub-segment of society, whichever way you would like to cut it. It's our stated intent to have our employee base reflect the diversity that society has and to be inclusive of every part of society. That's not because we think it's a nice ideal, although it is. It's because we think it makes us a better business. We think it gives us competitive advantage in the marketplace, and we think it will help us deliver the hard financial metrics which ultimately govern our work. As well as my day job, I am also the diversity champion on the Diageo executive, so I really care about that diversity agenda. It's personal to me, and I try and make it personal to everybody else who sits on that team. It's a complicated subject, isn't it, diversity? Because all of these dimensions of diversity are important. They're all relevant. They're all real. And therefore, getting into a conversation about it can sometimes feel a little bit complex. So for the purposes of simplicity and to help me tell a narrative, I've picked one dimension, which is the dimension of gender diversity. Now actually, the data says that companies that are good on gender diversity are also good on pretty much all of the other aspects of diversity. It tends to mean that the company is progressive. It tends to mean that the company is thinking about being inclusive to all parts of society. So I'm going to talk about gender. Hopefully you'll be able to take out stuff that's not just for clients, but also stuff for all other aspects of diversity too. And talking about gender diversity, the business case has been won. If there are people in your business that haven't bought the business case for gender diversity, show them the data. Here's a report that was quite recent. It ranked organisations based on the number of senior women that they had on their executive teams, and then looked at returns as measured by profitability, return on equity in this case. Companies that were at the top of the list delivered 41% more return on equity than the median. That's quite extraordinary. There was a McKinsey study. There are loads of studies. There was a McKinsey study which looked over a 2-year period. It force-ranked companies based on the percentage of women in senior positions, and there was a 17 percentage point higher return as measured by share price performance for those companies in the top quartile versus the average. There's many more studies. Almost every American university has looked at business performance. We're okay. We're cool. Brilliant. I thought it was better, actually. Basically, every American university has looked at this, and the good news is the data always backs up what hopefully we intuitively believe. And I suspect this is a little bit preaching to the choir in this room today. Diversity works in terms of business performance. It's an unshakable set of correlations that should lead us all to conclude cause and effect. And of course, it's not just about the developed world. Did you know that in Brazil and China, already more than 50% of women have tertiary education? By 2025, it'll be more than 60% in Brazil and China. There was a study that asked women in their 20s whether they aspired to be in a top job, was the way the question. The women in the United Arab Emirates, 90% said they did. 54% of American women said that they did. The emerging world is changing very rapidly. And it's not just about technology, although that is a big deal in the whole of the world, of course. But this is the generation of female emancipation in the emerging markets. I think Ghana 2 weeks ago, and one of the more pleasurable things that I did there was I went out for a few drinks with 10, 25-year-old-ish young Ghanaian women, and just talked to them about their life. I bought the drinks and talked to them about their life. And you know, what was really interesting was the way that they described their life versus their mum's life. Still a huge respect for history, religion, traditions, social mores, huge respect for the institution of marriage and children and what family represented, but a completely new dimension which was about career aspirations for themselves, a desire to be independent. And economic independence leads to social independence, and that leads to a completely different society. And that's true. I've done the same exercise in Kenya, in Vietnam, in Brazil, in Colombia. It's true across the world. And it's this generation. It's not a future thing. And of course, we're all marketers, or work for companies that are marketers, and women represent a very significant consumer base, dutifully ignored by my industry for about 400 years. Every booze brand in the world targeted men, if you think about it. Because if you target men, you'll get the women anyway, and if you target women, you'll feminize the brand and destroy it. I mean, what a patronizing thing to think. But my industry, including my company, thought that for about 400 years. So it's changing. You know the stats, 80% of purchase decisions in the US are governed by women. There'll be more female millionaires in the UK by 2025 than there are men in the 18 to 44 category, according to one report I was reading. So important as consumers, important as employees and potential employees. The case is closed. It's done. It's won. And as I say, if there is still a barrier inside your business on why gender diversity and thinking about inclusion is important, then look to the data, because it really is there to help win it on the basis that finance managers might interact. So let's get into it. I'm going to talk about Diageo. I'm going to talk about gender diversity at Diageo, and hopefully you'll get to draw the learnings, and some of our experience will be relevant to you. It starts, though, not with a conversation about diversity. It starts with a conversation about talent. Because if you don't have the talent agenda right for all employees, then there's absolutely no chance that you can be successful on the diversity pathway, in my judgment. So here are some of the things that we're doing which are for all employees. We have really rigorous HR systems, and that doesn't mean bureaucracy, but it does mean, for example, that every one of our 27,000 employees has at least 2 formal appraisal conversations a year which talk not only about their performance, but also talk about their hopes, their dreams, their development agenda, their strengths. Now, it's important. It's important that it's done in the same way, and it's important that we hold our leaders to account for owning this. It's not HR's job, by the way. They're the facilitators. Those of you in HR jobs, you are the facilitators, the leaders of the agenda, but the accountability for the implementation of rigorous systems is management. And that gives us great data from conversations. It tells us about how our employees are doing and what they aspire to. And that allows us to be meritocratic in every aspect of our work. Our reward systems are probably the most visible symbol of meritocracy. If you perform better at Diageo, you are paid better. Your bonus is bigger. You get more share options. And the system for allocation is transparent. That's really important, because inclusion starts with fairness. And we believe in meritocracy, deep, deep, deep down in our bones. We do have, it's quite a long sentence, programmatic interventions. So we have a grad scheme, everyone has a grad scheme, ours is quite good, I think. But we also have 2 others. There's a mid-career leadership development program for our brightest and our best in mid-career. That's orchestrated globally. It gives people access to new learnings, helps propel their leadership. We also have a program for our most senior managers. We spent 25 million quid 2 years ago putting our top 900 through a year-long program. Everyone had a coach, everyone had off-site activities, including the CEO, and he acted as a role model for getting the rather cynical senior management group to engage in this. And it made a difference. You know, people could see possibilities and understand themselves better than they did before. And if you believe that great leadership and great talent management leads to great business performance, which is what we believe, then that kind of investment is pretty much a no-brainer, actually. Clarity on who owns who. In a big company, and I guess there are some big, some small companies here, but in a big company, you just need to be organised. And actually, even more important than the rigorous HR systems, you need a place where you can talk about people, a place where it's expected that you discuss succession plans, you discuss how to stretch people, you discuss how we manage the single strongest asset that we have. So if you're a marketer in Diageo, you know that if you're at the most senior level, there's a subgroup of the executive that manage your career. If you drop down a level, my leadership team, the global marketing leadership team, manages your career. If you drop down a level, then it's the regional marketing leadership team. And if you're entry level, it's the local marketing director and his team. This is important for people because it's important that they know in a meritocratic world that somebody's talking about them. Somebody has their interests at heart and somebody's engaged in a conversation about how to stretch the bejesus out of them to make them better than they thought possible. And then sharing with people the content of those conversations transparently, openly, in a meritocratic society is really, really important. A couple of other things. We have, I'm sure you guys do, formal mentoring programs. Oh, I've just skipped on. Formal mentoring programs, and they're good, they work. But actually, more importantly, time spent on talent is seen as a good thing to do. I'd say about more than 50% of my time is spent on talent-related activities, hiring people, nurturing people. I never say no to a cup of tea to talk about whatever somebody wants to talk about. And sometimes it's, how do I progress my skills? Sometimes I'm just worried about this aspect of how my career is evolving. Sometimes it's, I just want to shoot the breeze with someone who's not my immediate boss and talk about how my relationship with the company can evolve. I spend that amount of time because it's the best way I can spend my time, not for any soft reason at all. And then, you know, value survey. We have a 91% response rate on our value survey. That's good, apparently. Every manager has metrics. They're judged on how performance improves according to the value survey, just as much as they're assessed on financial metrics. We have one measure. It's a bit of a tree-hugging comment, but it's called super engagement. Put simply, it's 5 questions on a 5-point scale. If you're top box on all 5, you're super engaged. It's things like, I would recommend working at Diageo to my friends, questions like that. We have 40% super engagement, 60% in the leadership population. And our aspiration is to grow that 5 points every year. And managers are judged on their ability to drive that metric. Because we care about it. Also, I expect people to interrogate the qualitative response from the value survey. And one of the questions I ask is, what did you think of the response from, and then pick a country where they can't speak the language. Because that means, if they know what the Koreans think, it means they've gone to the trouble of seeing a translated version of the verbatim comments, and that's important. So that's talent. That's all talent. And it is the bedrock of a diversity agenda. And without that, we have no hope of making progress on the diversity agenda. But let's talk about that now. And let me introduce Trevor. A few years ago at Diageo, we decided to have a look at ourselves in the mirror and try and understand what people thought about our company and who would be successful in it. And the answer came back from our employees that to be successful, you needed to be Trevor. You needed to be about 40, preferably white, definitely male, probably went to a private school, probably liked to play golf. Do I need to carry on? I kind of looked at myself in the mirror and thought, oh, blimey. And you know what, I joined Diageo 15 years ago, and in some ways that was a long time. In other respects, it wasn't that long ago. And I would say that it was a bit of a boys' club. It was a beer company that I joined, Guinness. The jokes were probably pretty male skewed. It was fun and people were polite, and I wouldn't say it was sexist, but it was a bit of a boys' club. And it's not now. And I'm not, as you'll hear me at the end, I don't think we've anywhere near finished our journey, but how it feels has changed. One of my experiences was that a few years after I joined, I was on a team of 10 senior people, and there were only 2 guys on that team. All of the rest of the senior managers were women. And I felt firsthand what Trevor often doesn't, which is how it feels to be unconsciously excluded from conversations. I did start spending more money on shoes, I confess. As I listened into the conversation which I didn't understand. But it's a weird feeling. When you're from the stereotype, it's actually a very helpful emotional activity, if you like, to suddenly feel on the outside. The girls on the team hated the idea that Jean-Francois and I felt in the minority. And actually, interestingly, they wanted balance in the team as well. They thought 8 out of 10 skewed women was just as bad as 8 out of 10 skewed men for effective performance management. But it was that experience that really confirmed in my mind, before some of this economic data came out, that diversity in teams was good. Diversity in teams would lead to better ideas and ultimately better performance. And Trevor, bless him, has a role to play at Diageo, but as a part of the mix of our leaders, not as the profile of our leaders. Important to talk about philosophy just for 30 seconds. We do not believe in quotas. We do not believe in positive discrimination. We think they're divisive and we think they're unhelpful. And the women in our organisation are as vociferous about this as you can possibly imagine. We're a meritocratic company. The concept of positive discrimination is not meritocratic. However, we do believe in targets, and we do believe in securing a fully diverse employee base, and that means intervention. And I hope it's not a subtle difference for you, but targets good, quotas bad, in our view. And I want to employ the very best candidate to jobs, and I want that outcome of that to be a diverse organisation. And that means making the candidate better. That's what it means. A bunch of stuff we're doing. We do have an overall target. The target, if you're interested, is that 30% of our leaders will be women by 2015. The current number currently is 26, so we're on track. As I'll show you in a minute, it's much better in some functions than others and better in some geographies than others. But we've got targets. We insist on a balanced slate in the recruitment process. We insist on 50-50 gender balance in our grad recruits. To be honest, that's easy. It's a little more difficult in Asia, but it's relatively easy. We do have employee groups. I was a bit surprised by the traction that the employee groups like Spirited Women, like the Rainbow Network for our gay employees, how people wanted to be part of them. I'm a sponsor, so I support them and I give them some money so they can have events, right? But the power that they have for the employees that are part of those groups, I suppose I told myself off for being a little bit sceptical about it. And if you've got employees that want to be part of groups, then I would encourage you to be a bit open-minded about it rather than sceptical about it. So we encourage that. We have about 17,000 women, for example, in our Spirited Women organisation. And they are pretty influential, and particularly on the subject of flexible working. They're really helpful for management because it gives us an easy access to the voice of this particular subgroup. Flexible working is a subject of the day. It is important if you want gender diversity to live and breathe. One of the things I've learned as we've gone through a kind of series of trying to say yes is that every case is a bit different. You've got to be careful not to generalise. You've got to be careful not to assume the motivation of the individual that you're talking to. And you've got to bring the concept of meritocracy to the table. Because flexible working needs a grown-up attitude from the employee, a grown-up attitude from the organisation. Both parties desperate to say yes, but with meritocracy in the room. If you're better, we are more flexible at Diageo. If you're top decile, we're really flexible. If you're bottom decile, we're really not. That's transparent. And in a grown-up world, it's really important that people understand that. Because if you get people articulating a right to certain behaviour, and you rely on policy, I don't think you get anywhere. Because managers start to revolt, and they come up with all sorts of reasons why they should say no. There's no way that job could be done 4 days a week. There's no way that job could be done without 65% travel. Actually, there's always a way, but you have to be motivated, and being meritocratic is key. And then we insist that our succession plans are balanced. Put quite a lot of energy, actually, into making sure that the plans for replacement of our top team and each successive layer have the right balance, not just through the gender lens, but certainly through the gender lens. And we spend a lot of time encouraging our senior women to embrace their role as role models and not to be embarrassed by their role as role models. Because quite a lot of the women that are doing really well are kind of, well, it just is, isn't it? I just got on with it. But actually, for the younger women in the organisation, they want to see normal women who aren't more masculine than the men, and they want to ask them about how they dealt with children and how they dealt with their husband's career, and actually just encouraging our senior women to make themselves available for that and to see it as an important, almost a duty of care to employees. It's a big deal. Other thing is policies can get in the way. You know, one of my senior team moved to the States, Guy, with his male partner. None of our policies dealt with what to do with an international signee who was a male gay person. None of them dealt with it. So you just rip them up and say, well, we need some different ones. Because we're an inclusive organisation and our policies aren't. And it wasn't because anybody decided that we shouldn't be inclusive when they wrote the policies. They just assumed that all of our expats would be a man with a trailing female spouse. That's what they assumed. And increasingly, that's not the case. Because increasingly, we have house husbands or husbands whose career takes a backseat while the women are driving theirs, and so on. So, some data, a couple of charts and data. Our board is a third female. It makes a difference, actually, when a third of your non-executives are women. Bloody difficult questions they ask. So they're not there just because they're women, I can tell you that. Actually, one of our board members is Lord Davis, Mervyn Davis, who wrote the Davis Report. And I think it's probably related that Diageo is now a poster child on this agenda, because Mervyn really gets it and really insists that we search the extra mile to get balance on our board. 36% of the board, 26% in our, what I call the leadership population. It's the top 900. Diageo calls it level 3+, rather romantically. It's marketing director and above, if you want to kind of put a job in your head. Across all functions, we're 26%. But if you look at it, HR got a problem, 2 females skewed. Looking at the room, it's not only Diageo that has that problem. Part of my function is marketing and innovation. We're ahead of target, even at the most senior levels. Fantastic. I also look after sales at Diageo, and we're rubbish. I had a conversation for a couple of hours yesterday with the most senior sales leaders in the team. Like, what is it? Why? By the way, our grads are 50-50 in sales. Why is it that by the time we get to senior levels, it's only 10% that are women? And we didn't know the answer fully, still, even though we've been working at it for a few years. But something to do with the chest beating that a salesman, you know, the glory of duking it out with Tesco is kind of more attractive to men than it is to women. Although great salespeople use their ears and mouth in the proportion God gave them. Right? And men aren't so good at that as well. So that's odd. Anyway, I've got work to do. We've got work to do in supply, and GM is the general management population. Probably not surprised by that. If I cut that by geography, it would say that we've still got a lot of work to do in Asia and Africa, but we're pretty good in Europe, North America, and Latin America. We've improved. 26% used to be 15%. But we're really dissatisfied with where we are. We haven't achieved our target yet. We don't have a fully diverse organisation, and we're working hard at improving our ability to be inclusive. So we've been particularly focusing recently on understanding why we're still not there yet with women in our company. And there's some predictable stuff around I need flexibility and you don't have flexibility in the way that I need it, and I'm cool with that, it just didn't quite work out. This is mostly exit interview data, by the way. One other stat, in the value survey that I talked about earlier, on average, female leaders score their relationship with Diageo 10 points lower than male leaders do. The numbers for all leaders are high, but on super engagement, the women are something like 61% and the men are 72% or something like that. So we've done quite a lot of work to understand why this is. And I think it's because when we describe great leaders, we still use quite masculine attribute terminology. You know, we still talk about impact, right? Which guys get, and most women kind of go, well, I don't know if I want to do impact. Or drive, or edge. And these are words which actually describe inputs, not outputs. And one of the things we're learning is we need to talk, in our language, we need to talk about the outputs and put less emphasis on the attribute-based inputs. Or at least when we do talk about inputs, really think about the battle for market share. That's what salesmen do. It's like, well, female salespeople don't really call it the battle for market share. And that's just language which is just in our business that we need to kind of wrestle out. And one of the things we're doing is trying to get at the unconscious bias that we all have by having balanced interview panels. And making sure that in our judgments, we're really digging underneath the skin of who's best based on the outcomes that they can deliver, rather than who's the best profile based on the input attributes, which use language which came almost certainly from men. And I'm part of this, by the way, I kind of own it. In fact, there's an important point. This whole agenda has to be owned by the business leaders. It has to be discussed by the global executive and every local executive team. The general managers own the talent agenda, and they have to own the diversity agenda, thus allowing HR to lead us with what we should do about it, rather than trying to persuade us that it's worth spending time on. So that's where we are. Progress. I think quite significant progress from the boys' club that I joined 15 years ago. We are an inclusive organisation compared to most. We have really sincere desires to be fully balanced in our gender diversity and inclusive to every subsegment of society that you can imagine. One of the ways that we got engaged by it was that we treat our diversity statistics in the same way that we treat our financial statistics. So people miss their financial numbers. And if they do, they get real scrutiny. Right? Why did you miss your number, Brazilian MD, or whatever? We now have the same scrutiny on the diversity statistics, with no tolerance for answers like, well, it's difficult in supply, isn't it? Because it shouldn't have to be, if we really think about how we create an inclusive organisation. And ultimately, here's how you tell. This is my leadership team as of today. They are 35% women. They live in 6 different locations around the world, from Singapore to Sao Paulo. There are 6 nationalities represented, and all bar 2 have lived and worked in a country that they were not born in. That's the future. And actually, I think when I look at the succession plans of the guys coming behind, they're going to describe our improvement as the first baby steps towards a truly inclusive organisation, I suspect. I know that the future marketing leadership team at Diageo will be much more diverse than the one that I have on the screen behind me, even though this is much more diverse than the one that I first joined 10 years ago. So we treat it like financial targets. Ultimately, you have to use data, but in order to improve the data once it's owned, the people who are running the business need to want to make a difference. And once they want to make a difference, then the creative ideas will flow, and the succession plans to these jobs will have the competitive advantage that I think Diageo needs, which is a truly diverse and inclusive organisation. So thank you for listening, and I'll take some questions now.